You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. Our presenting sponsor is the entertainment payroll company Extreme Reach. What you may not know about Extreme Reach is that they are already an industry disruptor in the areas of creative asset management and video ad distribution. And now they're poised to disrupt the entertainment payroll business. If you're creating content, call them and tell them I sent you. Today I got to speak with Lorraine Devon Wilke. Lorraine is a writer, an actor, a musician, an activist, but today we mostly talked about the writing. In 2010, she launched her arts and politics blog, Rock+Paper+Music, and from 2011 to 2018, she was a popular contributor at HuffPost, typically focused on politics and social issues. A produced and awarded screenwriter, she spent more recent years working in long-form fiction as well. Both her award-winning novels, After the Sucker Punch and Hysterical Love, are available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and her latest, The Alchemy of Noise, contemporary literary fiction that digs deep into issues of privilege, profiling, and prejudice in contemporary Chicago, is published by She Writes Press and was released just this month. We talked mostly about her book, and we got very deep into race and politics and the work that white people need to do. Buckle in, because we went there. You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, and the merchandise. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places. Also, the Insider's Guide to Breaking Into and Navigating Hollywood, called Catch a Break, has launched, and it is available on Apple Podcasts, all the podcast places, and on the website, catchabreakpodcast.com. Go check that one out, too. Okay, here's my conversation with Lorraine. Have a listen. What do you do?
What do I do? Well, I write mostly. I'm married. I have a grown son. I sing, I write songs, I write articles, and I write books. That's what I do.
You are an artist.
I'm an artist, yeah.
We're here today talking about The Alchemy of Noise, which is your brand new book.
Yes.
Which I thought was delicious. I was finishing up last night on the subway reading it.
Oh, good.
And someone leaned over and was like, that looks like a good book. I was like, it is, go get it.
Good, that's great to hear.
I know once we get into the book, we're probably never going back. So let's talk about your career as a writer. Did I read you were one of 11 kids?
That is true.
That is bananas.
It's totally bananas.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Chicago, and I grew up in Illinois. My family moved when I was little to a tiny little farm town in northern Illinois, bike riding distance to Wisconsin, a farm town that was like 350 people called Richmond.
And you were half of them.
And we were half of them, that's right. We grew to be half of them. And then I grew up there. I did high school in a slightly bigger town, a little bit south of there, Crystal Lake, and then I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign. And then I came out to LA. I was on the road with a rock band, and I left school, and
Oh my God.
and I landed here, and I stayed. I fell in love with it and stayed.
Where are you in the birth order?
Third.
Wow.
I was a little mommy. It was 3 girls, and we all became little mommies, too.
Like, how many kids did you raise before you left home?
Oh, my God. Well, let's see. When I left, my youngest sister was 17 years younger than I am, and when I left, she was a baby, so I didn't have much interaction with her as a child. And I was in college so the first 6 kids are the family that I most had contact with.
That just seems
nuts.
crazy.
It is crazy. Part of that was why I've only had one child, and why I didn't have that child till fairly late in life, because I was like, I've done this.
Right, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I already did it, and it was okay, but yeah.
Now, when and how did you know you're a writer?
I was in college, and my sophomore year in college, I got involved in a play. It was an original project. It was a musical play around the idea of the American presidency. And the director of the play was also one of my professors, used all of the actors that he cast as sort of collaborative in putting the play together. It wasn't so much written, we compiled pieces about different presidents, but it was the first time that I got involved with that process of putting something like that together, and it was really fun and exciting. And I can't say that I thought of myself as a writer then. I really didn't, but that was the first little inkling that it was something that I I liked. I was always one of those people that, felt very opinionated, and I would write the letter to the editor. And when I started my blog in 2010, I referenced that. I was like, I don't need to write letters to the editor anymore. I'll just put them here in my blog,
That is hilarious. I always talked about I wanted to have a website called Strongly Worded Letters.
That's so great.
Because every now and then you need a strongly worded letter.
That is an excellent name. That is, and also I got, I came out here, I was in music, but I also got involved in acting, and I thought I was going to have this brilliant film career, which did not pan out. But I did get involved in writing a lot of screenplays. And that's really when my writing started, because I enjoyed that process, I enjoyed that format, and it turns out I was kind of good at it. And one of the films I co-wrote did get made, small independent film.
What was it called?
1990. It was called To Cross the Rubicon.
So you did script writing first and then novels?
Yes.
That's unusual.
Yeah. Well, and I always wanted to write a novel, but I never felt like I had a topic that felt like that was the medium it should be expressed in. And then after the film, I met my husband on the film, and we got married 8 months after we met each other. Came back down to LA because it was shut up in Seattle. And, I kept my hand in music. I had another band. I was still doing all of that, writing songs, made a record. And still writing screenplays, wrote several, but I still wanted to write a novel. And then in about 2009, I got an idea, and I thought, I'm going to do this now. Because at that point, my musical career was it was clear I had aged out, which was devastating.
So you were like 25?
Yeah, that's right, Chili. But I felt like I had aged out, and it was heartbreaking for me, devastating, because music was my big dream. Music was my first muse.
Yeah.
And so I kind of assuaged my grief by diving into writing this novel, which ended up being very therapeutic for me on so many levels, and I thoroughly enjoyed the process.
What was that novel called?
It's called After the Sucker Punch.
What was it about?
The story came to me from my sister, who my father used to write journals all through his life. And we were privy to them. He wanted us to read them, which I rarely did. I know.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
I know. Well, I probably should have, because years after he died, I was at my sister's, and she said, "Did you ever read this one year?" And I was like, "No." And she gave it to me, and it turned out to be a year in which she'd written quite a bit about me. I had already moved to LA, was doing my rock and roll dream, and there were lots and lots and lots of entries that were very negative about me.
Oh, man.
I mean, he basically said I was a failure, I was a disappointment, and it was so weird.
Don't read that journal.
Oh, I know. And it was, he's dead, so there's absolutely nothing I can do about that. Now, I was...
But be mad about it.
Well, I was
forever.
distant enough from my father that I wasn't devastated. I was like, that's creepy. But I was in a women's group at the time, and I told these women this story, and they immediately all burst into tears, and were going, "Oh my God, if my father had done that." And I thought, oh, this is interesting, because I didn't have that reaction. I was hurt, but it was like, yeah, Dad, whatever. Because I had a very different kind of family, because we had so many, and I left early.
Right.
So when I saw the reaction of these women and some men, I went, this is a good story. This is an interesting story. So I took that what if. So I created this family, and I created this situation where she discovers this journal on the night of her father's funeral. That's the first chapter. And so After the Sucker Punch is the entire year, the next year, of the impact that it has on her existentially and emotionally and personally and in every way. And so it's just this kind of year after this, finding this journal and the kind of the journey she goes on. And it's kind of, there's humor in it. There's a lot of family stuff. There's, love stuff. And a lot of discussions about her path in life. And I loved writing it. It was actually therapeutic for me, even though it was fiction. I got to kind of work out my demons through the process of writing it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this book.
Okay.
Tell us what it's about.
This book is a departure from my first two books in that it's much more serious. There's, my first two books had a good mix of humor and drama in them. And this one, I started working for the Huffington Post back in 2011. I had contacted Arianna Huffington with my blog, and she contacted me back, which was unbelievable.
Herself?
She did, herself. And she invited me to write with them. So I did that up until last year when they shut down that program. It was a contributors program. And I started writing a lot of op-eds and current events and, pieces about what's happening in our society. And a lot of that had to do with racial issues and racial discord, Trayvon Martin, Ferguson, all the police shootings, of course Barack Obama's election and all the madness revolving around that. And I referenced the fact that during the 80s, when I was very immersed in rock and roll, I lived for 6 years with a musician who happened to be black. And whatever I thought I knew about race and about life in America for people of color, I grew up in a very liberal family, so there weren't any issues about that. But I thought, okay, well, it's better now. Living with somebody and having that kind of proximity let me know how little I knew. And even before the phrase white privilege had been coined, it was clear to me that we were having two very different experiences in life.
Yeah.
And because I lived with him and we worked together, we were together all the time, we shared a car, so he was always driving me back and forth to work. I had a hands-on experience with being stopped by the police more times than I ever could possibly imagine, to the point that even now, decades later, I get shaky when I see a police car around me, because just as we see in the news today, we were pulled over for nothing. I mean, nothing.
Driving while black.
Exactly. And this was so shocking to me. And plus, there was just a series of things that happened in our years together. So that relationship ended many decades ago. I'm not in touch with that person any longer, but I filed that information. So when I started writing for HuffPost and I started covering the topic of race, I referenced this era of my life and the education that it had given me. And I wrote a piece called, this is such an on-the-nose title, I actually hate it, but it made the point, "No white people will never understand the black experience." And it was after Ferguson, and there was a lot of discussion on social media about it. And white people were saying, my white friends were saying, well, it's not ours to discuss. We shouldn't say anything about it. My liberal white friends,
Yeah.
and I was like, it's everyone's conversation. It absolutely must be discussed. And in this article, I talked a lot about how white people just they can't have the experience because they're not black, unless you do a Black Like Me thing, right? Just celebrated its 50th a few years ago. That idea of a person who embodied a black skin for an experiment. No other way can you actually know what that's like. Proximity is the closest you get. And so after I wrote that article, I got a tremendous amount of feedback from people within the black community, some of whom contacted me personally, some contacted me through the article on HuffPost, some through social media, basically saying the largest portion of that audience said, we appreciate it. We've never seen a white person be this blunt about this. So that gave me the idea, and I thought, okay, I want to expand on this theme. I want to expand on the idea of what is this experience like. And so I dragged forth my historical experience and perspective. I decided I did not want to write a memoir because I don't write memoirs. I write fiction. I created a cast of characters. I put them in contemporary Chicago. I made them fall in love and start to find their equilibrium, and then I burdened them with many of the obstacles and events that I had witnessed and experienced in my own relationship.
God, it was constant.
Yeah, well, that's
brutal.
Yeah, it was brutal. And gave them the task of, how do you survive this? How do you gain knowledge from this? How do you evolve? And how do you survive? And do you survive? And I don't want to give away whether they do or they don't, because I want readers to find that out as they read the book. But it's a journey, of what, and they both have to learn, because it's not just the white woman learning what the black man's experience is. It's also the black man having to understand that even open-minded white people are missing a lot of data. They're missing a lot of information and knowledge. And it's important to translate some of that. It's our obligation as white people to learn it, to open our minds, to seek. We don't sit back and wait for somebody to educate us.
To go out of our way to educate ourselves.
But he had to learn, he had to fight his own issues of forgiveness and trying to traverse the journey that he was on, and which was horrifying, and difficult. So that's what the book's about. I call it a socio-political love story because it really is a love story. It's a story about two people who fall in love and then are met with all these obstacles. But of course, it brings in the contemporary world that we live in today, which is police profiling, white privilege, the insensitivity of microaggressions, the violence of flat out aggressions, and what both of their reactions are to each of these things, and the reactions of the people in their orbits, both family and friends. So that's what the book's about.
So interesting. And when you said will they survive it, will they literally survive, and will their relationship survive? Both of those things were going on. And there were several things that stood out to me in this book. And I also we talked a little bit about this before we started. I want to just say the elephant in the room, which is I feel a little uncomfortable for us two white women to be having this conversation about race on here. Because I know you can be as woke or educated as you can be, and you're still missing so much information, and certainly not an authority on anything. But open and wanting to learn and wanting to be the best allies we can be in solving this problem as much as one can in one's lifetime.
Right.
All of that being said, and I don't want to give away too much of the book either, but there was the main character's sister, who is a Black Lives Matter activist and very involved in the community and so full of rage because of all the things that she sees in her daily life. She does give the gift to the white woman of really breaking some things down and explaining it, which I thought was I felt was kind of the crux of the book. Now I'm talking too much. This bit here, where she really lays out white privilege, would it be inaccurate to say that's kind of an overarching goal of this book?
Yeah, no, it is not inaccurate to say, because one of the things that I experienced was my open-minded, liberal, progressive white friends saying the dumbest stuff, doing the dumbest stuff. I said to somebody the other day who had read the book, I said, all the stuff that you read that friends said, workers, friends, all said to me.
Oh, for sure.
None of that was made up, and I'm not joking. Whether it was, a friend writing me a letter and saying, what do you know about black men? What are you going to have, watermelon and fried chicken in your refrigerator? That was an actual friend who said that to me in a letter. And I did not talk to her for quite a while after that. The thing is to say, you said, would it be wrong to say it's about that? No, because I think, every day I learn. I was thinking about, even in articles that I wrote 5-6 years ago, how much has changed since then. Issues and points I made about race then have evolved since then.
I feel like since I've started this podcast 3 years ago, I listened back to things I said at the beginning and I cringe.
I know, and I think that, me too. I wrote some stuff where I'm like, oh God. I think
it's a journey.
I know. Well, because I think the issue of white privilege, when I first heard that phrase, I was one of those people that was like, wait a minute, if you think that I got whatever I got because someone handed it to me, you are so wrong. I had to work so hard for everything. I completely didn't get it. And in fact,
would you read that bit?
Sure. Okay, so this is the main male protagonist's sister, Vanessa, who you described. She's a BLM activist and very involved with the community. And she's talking to Sidoni, who's the white female protagonist, who's in a relationship with this woman's brother. And this woman is not that thrilled about that. So this is the section where the two of them are sort of stuck together in the living room, and this conversation comes up. Sidoni says to her, that word, white privilege, presumes so much about me. That presumes that I have what I have because it was granted to me somehow, and nothing could be further from the truth. Everything I have, I got through my own hard work, and I resent being made to feel otherwise. Vanessa's face softened, but I'm not saying that. I have no doubt you've worked really hard for what you have. That's not what privilege means in this context. You should know that by now. Then explain the context. Okay. Vanessa stood with a slight teeter, glancing toward the staircase as if to assess how much time she had. She launched with the didacticism of a professor. Privilege is walking into any situation armed with the confidence of your perceived majority, the blank slate of your whiteness and its status as the cultural norm. It's your whiteness exempting you from suspicion, from limit, from microaggressions and implicit bias, from being followed around department stores or getting profiled by the police or the court system. Privilege is what allows you to get a loan or rent an apartment, expect proper medical care without any thought to your race. It's about your race not being a reason for anything, whether shoving you into a category or impacting an outcome. Privilege is living without the color of your skin being the first thing people see, think, know, or judge about you. She turned to Sidoni almost apologetic. Can you understand that?
That's it, right?
Yeah. Well, and that was an education that I had to have because that was said to me. I did a 3-part interview on HuffPost with a black woman, a woman that I had met through that article I was telling you about. And she knows that this character is somewhat based on her, is just a fierce, no fools, what is that term?
Don't suffer fools.
Doesn't suffer any fools. And we did this 3-part interview where I said, no holds barred. I ask whatever I want to ask, and you answer however you want to answer it. And she's the one who really laid it out. And this was several years ago when white privilege was just starting to be used a lot in the vernacular, and so many people misunderstood it. This was when Black Lives Matter, well, all lives matter. And she was the one who, and I didn't know her then, she wrote something on her Facebook page because some guy was saying, all lives matter, what is this? And she said, well, of course they do. But if Black lives were included in that, we wouldn't have to say this. We wouldn't have to say Black Lives Matter. But we do. And then there was another equation she made that totally hit me. It was like, I thought, as a woman, as a feminist, if I said women's lives matter, and you said to me, well, all lives matter, I would feel like, whoa, sister, you're missing the... And that was like the light went off, and I went, oh, okay, I get it. So yeah, that's... I don't know where I'm going with this now, but that's the essence, and I felt like I wanted to tell a really good story, but imbue it with these ideas and this education that she received so that readers can potentially gain a little bit of knowledge as well.
Yeah, I thought it was really beautifully done.
Thank you.
That woman you were just talking about, she also read it.
Yes.
And made sure you weren't going off the rails.
Well, yeah, because that's such a big deal. I mean, when I wrote the book, I had decided this time I have self-published my previous 2 books, and I wanted to go the traditional route with this book. I wanted to get an agent and get a publisher and all that. And I spent a year and a half going through probably, 160, 180 agents, and no one was interested in the book. And several people who read it wrote me back and said, it's an excellent book, beautifully written, important topic.
We don't want to touch it.
We don't want to touch it. And that's in a quote. And this one agent said, I don't have the courage to touch it because everyone's so afraid of being accused of cultural appropriation that I wouldn't be able to sell this. And I even went to a writers' conference where I did the whole meet an agent kind of thing, and every one of them said that. And I went, oh my God. And luckily, I met Brooke Warner, who's the head of She Writes Press, the company that ultimately did publish it. And she said, well, you may get some pushback on this, but I don't care. She was just fearless. And I love that about her because my feeling is, and I've talked to several black writers and black people who are not writers about this subject. And the feedback that I've gotten is just do it right. Make it right. If you don't get it right, we're going to let you know. But you can't tell an artist who they can write about or what they can write about. That's ridiculous.
Men have been writing women forever.
Exactly. We wouldn't have science fiction. We wouldn't have historical fiction because who knows what Marco Polo was really like. I mean, it's a stupid faux solution to a very real problem, which is underrepresentation of diverse voices. That's a very real problem in the entertainment business in general, in media in general, but certainly in publishing. And you don't solve that problem by saying to white writers, you can't write black characters. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely antithetical to the mandate of art, which is about freedom and expression. And you can't say you can't write any character that's outside your cultural demographic. That's insane.
Right.
What you do is you sign and you promote and you interact with a greater percentage of diverse writers and diverse voices. That's the solution, not shutting out and shutting down other people. So as I was writing this, and when I wrote this book, I had no idea that was the cultural trend at the moment. None. So when I started getting all this feedback from agents, I was like, what? It was just like, well, leave it to me to write a book, great timing. But I knew that the book would meet the standards of anyone who would have an issue about white writers misrepresenting black people or black culture. And so my answer to anyone who said, and because a friend of mine, a black friend of mine, shared something about the book on her Facebook page, and a lot of particularly women, black women in her group, were very negative about it. They were like, we don't need a white writer to tell our stories. And she said, this is her story. And she has me to guide her and make sure she got it right, and she got it right. And my answer to them was, I get your concerns, read the book first, and if you think I got any of it wrong, let me know.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it. And that will be my answer to anybody, because I trust the Black readers who read it and said, you got it right. I trust them. So I'm throwing it out there, and hopefully, anyone who reads it will see that. We'll see.
It is also dicey, and you're very brave.
But see, I guess, and maybe it's because I did the HuffPost thing for so many years, where I would write about gun control and religion, and where I would just get bombarded, to the point where I'd be like, ugh. So I feel like I've developed a pretty thick skin after doing that sort of work.
Well, and you're also doing the work.
Yeah.
And making sure you have the people read it and make sure you're getting it right.
Right.
There was another point in the book where Sidoni, it may have been in the letter she wrote to him towards the end of, I really didn't get it, and now I get how much I didn't get it. Because I saw people being brutalized on the news, and they were always characterized as a criminal or a thug or something.
They're out there somewhere.
I didn't realize just walking around in brown skin made you vulnerable to that kind of treatment. Yeah. Like, that was the huge eye-opener for her. Was that the big eye-opener for you?
That's probably more created for the character. I think I was a little more worldly wise than this character is. Mm-hmm. I led a very different life than this character did. She lived a much more, in a way, sheltered life than I did. Because
you can be super liberal and super sheltered.
Right.
And have the right, I want to say, attitude or openness, and still have no idea.
But you also don't realize, right, that it's like you live a life, and you suddenly look around you and you realize there are no people of color in my life. I don't interact on a regular basis. I don't think I'm prejudiced. I don't think I'm bigoted. But I don't have interactions with Black people that much. A lot of people have that experience. They don't live in cities. They live in small towns. They just don't have the experience. So anything that's happening to a Black person is out there somewhere.
Right.
It's in the cities. It's in the rough neighborhoods.
It's not your friend, your relative, your
right.
loved one.
And I think that creates a tremendous deficit of empathy for this ridiculous rash of people calling cops on Black people simply living there, barbecuing in a park.
Stupid.
Or, waiting for some friends at Starbucks.
Being in their dorm.
Being in their dorm, or moving into a building, which oddly, that one happened after I wrote the book. And I haven't seen like that, because that did happen to the man that I was living with. He was, that pretty much describes what happened to him.
Like moving into your apartment and someone calls the cops.
We were already in our apartment, and he bought a new TV. So he was moving the TV up, and cops descended on him and slammed him to the ground. And, if a neighbor hadn't come out and gone, "What are you doing? He lives here," he would have been arrested. And that happened fairly recently to a guy who had been I think he'd worked for Obama, and he was moving into a new apartment in Washington, D.C. And I even had a white liberal male friend of mine say, well, if someone was making all that noise at night, and I would probably call the police too. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, are you kidding me? I said, that's so sad. I don't even know if I could be friends with you anymore. It was just ridiculous. But those are the kind of things that I think people don't get. And I'm hoping, and I'm not aggrandizing myself and thinking I've written some great tome that's going to change the world. I just wanted to tell a story that I had experienced and witnessed and imagined and extrapolated upon, to tell a great story, because that's the first mandate of fiction, but to also hopefully illuminate some things. And hopefully, because I believe fiction has the power to change things and change the world. And that's the kind of fiction I like. That's the kind of fiction I want to write. I think fiction has an unusual power, because unlike reading a nonfiction book that might be written about race, fiction allows you to get emotionally involved and invested in characters and people that this writer has created. And
you get inside, get inside their heads, and you get inside the room that you would not be allowed inside.
Exactly, which is a very different way of translating information or transmitting information than, a nonfiction book about race in America, which is all valid and good. But, fiction, it's almost like you learn it by osmosis rather than a scholarly approach. And I think that can be very impactful and very powerful. It always was for me in my life. I was certain books were life-changing for me that I read. Fiction, about issues that I didn't know as much about. Or
storytelling is where it's at.
Yeah.
And that is the whole point of what we're doing,
Isn't
right?
it? Exactly.
Have you... I get the sense from some of your articles and some of your writing. Do you consider yourself an activist?
Yeah.
Ally?
Yeah, I do.
How does that drive your work?
I feel that if you are honestly an activist and an ally, you don't look at anything you do as accidental. You take every opportunity that you have or you take to communicate, to transmit ideas, to engage with people, to offer your contribution to changing the narrative. And I do feel that responsibility. I feel it whether I'm on social media, whether I'm writing an article, whether I'm talking about my book or talking about things that are going on in the news. I don't always succeed. Sometimes my frustration, gets the best of me, and I'll be on Twitter going, good, and then I'll go back and go, okay, let's just, because I'm human too.
You can't be fueled by rage all the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I've always felt that, I've felt this obligation to keep the discourse civil because I so object to the lack of civility in our social discourse. I so object to it. And I see it every day, every single day. Some more than others, certainly more now than before with Trump around.
Like, have you seen the tweets today? And that's an evergreen statement.
Yeah, well, I mean, and, I don't know if I want to go off on a tangent about, I don't know.
You can. We can always cut it out.
Well, it's just that there's just been a lot of debate about Me Too related to the Joe Biden story.
Oh, yeah.
And I have found, I've been very saddened by listening to liberal women attack the woman who spoke about her discomfort with him. And basically, in my eyes, they've literally thrown Me Too under the bus, because the whole mandate of Me Too is we listen to the woman. We don't judge her. We don't say, well, that wasn't bad enough. He didn't rape you. He didn't assault you. What, he touched your head? So what? And I'm saying, no, that's the whole thing. The whole thing is consent. Did you consent? Well, here's a picture of her with Bernie's hand on her shoulder. Doesn't matter. Maybe that was okay with her. And
both things can be true.
Exactly.
She could have been wildly uncomfortable in that moment, and he could have had no malicious or power dynamic intent. Both of those things can be true.
Or he could not have the intent, but be operating from an ingrained, male-privileged perspective that I can touch anybody's body that I want, without ascertaining whether or not they're comfortable with that, which is an antiquated idea that needs to change. And
so do we burn Biden at the stake, or do we correct his behavior?
Well, I personally don't think anyone's burning Biden at the stake. I think, and that was the reason I brought it up, was because I wrote an essay about it, and oh my God, the vitriol thrown at me was unbelievable. And I just kept saying over and over, this isn't about Biden, this isn't about Bernie, this is about consent.
And can her experience be valid?
Right. We don't get to decide whose experience is valid based on our perspective and our filters. We don't get to decide, I only believe the women who accuse men I don't like. Right? We don't get to decide that.
There it is.
Right. I only believe women who are accusing men who are on the other side of the aisle.
Right.
And that's what's going on. And my whole thing is, let's talk about this civilly. And it's been very uncivil. And I have tried to maintain my civility, and I always try to. And people will say to me, how do you do that? Because I would want to kill people. And I go, well, because I have to walk the walk. I have to, if I'm saying to you, don't come into my world screaming and yelling and calling me names and then do the same in return, that's not acceptable. So I have to sometimes really work hard to respond to people in a way that isn't abdicating of my perspective or my view, but do it in a way that's civil. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
And I think that is such a big part of the work right now, is keeping a handle on yourself and staying centered and rational and having these conversations, which it's so hard to have right now with people, and the politics being what they are.
Well, and to go back to the sort of the theme of the novel, when you're in conversations sometimes on social media, there's a group that Jada Pinkett has called Red Table Talks, I think is the name of it. And I'm part of that group, and I haven't contributed much because, wow, those threads get really, really, really tough. and I see the white people floundering. I see the black people being very aggressive against them. I see a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of lack of empathy. And then there's always those who go, wait a second, and if you're going to launch into those discussions with people from the black community or activists from any community outside your own, one of the things that a woman said to me, a woman I don't know, this was during the discussion about white people will never understand the black experiences. I said something like, in a response to her, something about doing something a certain way, and she said, we're too tired to worry about how this hits you. We're too tired to worry about making this easy for you. And my friend Regina, who I call a friend now, said the same thing. She said, toughen up. Actually, I gave that to Vanessa. Toughen up. If you want to be in this fight, we can't dance around you. We got way too much else to worry about. We cannot be worried about you. If you're going to be an ally, if you're going to be a partner in this, an activist here,
catch up
and toughen up, and don't take everything personally, because it's not personal. And that's what I see at Red Table Talks, is the white people taking everything very personally. They'll say, but I'm not like that. And it's like, well, this isn't really about you. This is about the bigger picture.
So many people take care of you in your experience. And it feels totally valid and fair to say, like, don't make me stop and educate you from point one.
Right. But it's tough, because I've been the recipient of some of that rancor, and it's tough. You want to say, but I'm one of the good people. And they're like, we don't care. What do you want to cook?
Hashtag not all men.
Right. Do you want a cookie? And I'm like, that's not what I want. I don't want a cookie. I don't want a pat on the back.
Right. It's super uncomfortable.
It is, but it's like you got to keep doing it anyway, because that's,
because we all want to get to the other side.
Right. And the thing is that we're not starting off equal, right? It's like that would be great if that were the case, but that's not the case. White people are always going to start off on a much easier plane, and so they don't get to complain too much about how hard it is to be an ally.
It just Crimea River, how hard it is to be
really
an ally.
Tough. But to go back to real quickly, because I thought this was such a great line, I thought of it just now, is that idea of a white writer writing black characters. I was talking about it with a black male writer, and he said he didn't agree with that. He said, I don't agree with that. And he said, I don't just want allies, I want accomplices. And accomplices are people that are writing books like this. He said, that's what I want as a black person. So he said, write your damn book, just get it right. That's all anybody's ever. Isn't that a great line?
I love that.
I know, I never forgot that, because I thought that was, and I said to him, can I use that? He was like, it's all yours.
Yeah, can I use that?
Yeah, sure. Because I think it's true, because I think, it's like we're in this together, and we're going to, even the good people are going to stumble and fall and make mistakes and say stupid shit, and, that's just the way this goes, and everybody's just got to keep going. It doesn't matter if it hurts, or you fall down, or people don't like you for a minute, or they think you're stupid, or whatever. You just got to. And when you said I was brave to write this book, I think it became a thing to me of like, well, if I get attacked, if black readers come out and say, "Who are you? How dare you write this story?" I'll just have to endure it, because I think at the end of the day, telling this story has merit, and so I think it was worth telling.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be told over and over and over again, and I think white people need to listen.
Yeah.
What do you make of what's gone on with women the last few years?
Well, I mean, this goes right back to what I was just talking about. I think that, well, today I wrote a response to somebody who was talking about the Biden thing, and I said, I have to be honest, I'm very dispirited right now, today, not always, today, because the reaction that I saw this woman get felt very antiquated to me. It felt, I said, it's sort of the political contemporary version of The Accused, right? I was waiting for someone to start talking about her skirt being too short or her dancing too sexy. It was like...
Well, she did ask him to go endorse her.
There you go. There's a lot of parsing and a lot of, and my attitude is none of that matters. None of that matters.
Because people love Biden and can't bear.
But see, that's the problem. That's the problem. It's like this doesn't. We don't get to decide what another's experience was with somebody. It's like, I always remember the TV movie years and years ago called Something About Amelia. Do you remember that? Ted Danson was the father, and I can't remember the name of the young actress who was the daughter. There were two daughters, and he was sexually abusing one of them. And the older daughter, who he was not sexually abusing, towards the end as things were coming out, one of the big things she kept saying is, well, he didn't touch me. He didn't do anything to me. So she was not believing her sister. And that's kind of become a big element of issues of sexual harassment and sexual abuse and sexual predatory behavior is you can have two women in the same room with the same man, and one will be abused and the other won't. That doesn't mean this woman's wrong that because she got abused and this one's going, well, he didn't, and never touched me.
Well, the woman has come out with the article saying Biden did the same thing to me and I didn't mind one bit.
Well, and that's fine. And that's fine.
It doesn't mean it didn't bother her.
Exactly. And that's the whole point. And see, to me, it's kind of like we're missing, we've lost the script here. The script is not,
the plot.
Yes. The script is not just, well, someone like Christine Blasey Ford, who we liked because she was talking against a guy we didn't like as liberals. So, oh yeah, we're going to get behind her. Well,
but we're mad about Al Franken.
Right. Right. Or we're saying that this woman, Lucy Flores, is wrong because we like Biden. Well, sorry, it doesn't work that way. You don't get to pick and choose which women are okay to believe. You listen and you pay attention and you honor their experience. And that doesn't mean that Joe Biden is evil and he shouldn't run. I said to somebody, if he wants to run, he should run and make this a topic of conversation. Make this a learning experience. Everybody's do a town hall where he brings Lucy Flores in and he brings in Anita Hill and talk about these issues. Talk about the evolution he's had or what he's learned.
Let's have a nuanced conversation.
Exactly. And I want to tell you, I got so attacked for that idea. So attacked. And I just went, well, you are not getting this then.
And we're never going to get anywhere if it's just the surface and black and white and it's done. Exactly. And the people have to disappear.
Well, and the thing is, and it was funny because several people thought and accused me of being a Bernie supporter, and that was why I was saying what I was saying. And I said, I am not actually, but that's irrelevant because even if I was, it wouldn't. That's not the point. But I'm not actually.
Right, but there is the added element of some people have taken Me Too and weaponized it because they know liberals will take down whoever's accused. So well, there is an element of that.
But see, I don't. That would be no different than saying Christine Blasey Ford speaking up about her experience with Kavanaugh as he's being vetted for the Supreme Court was totally political and manipulated, right? But it was because he was being vetted for the Supreme Court that she went, well, I can't sit on this anymore. Well, Lucy Flores said the same thing. Yeah. He's now running for president, and I was uncomfortable with his behavior, and I think this is I'm not the only one, and she's not. There's been plenty of other women who have spoken about his handsiness. Yeah. So you can say, well, is it politically motivated? It's to the same degree that Christine Blasey Ford's was.
Because it doesn't dismiss it.
That person is moving into a position where he's vulnerable to being attacked for this. This needs to be put on the table. We aren't hiding this stuff. We have a president who's currently in office who's one of the biggest predators in the world. And, we can't be those people that ignore that stuff. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And to me, when you say women, what's going on with women now, I think a lot of good things, and I think a lot of things that worry me. This event has worried me. The way that liberal women have reacted to this has worried me. It's made me sad. It's made me think we're not as far along as I keep thinking we are. We're not.
It's just us forward, one step back.
Yeah. But
it may be that way for a while.
Yeah, and I think the way you just put it is good for me to remember the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is definitely a 1 step back. But I think, in general, the Women's March, the women's, all of that was so empowering to me and continues to be empowering to me, even despite all the politics in the midst of that whole thing. I just think that I personally believe a woman needs to be elected president and not just people are like, oh, it's identity. No, it's not. It has to do with cultural evolution. It's almost like the longer you don't do something you need to do, the more of an obstacle it becomes.
And a bigger deal it becomes.
Right. And so to me, we need to do it for the health of our country. Mm-hmm. It's not just, oh, I want a woman because I'm a woman. No, that has nothing to do with it. And there are tons of qualified men. This is not about, this is about the fact that I believe from a very big picture, existential, cultural evolutionary perspective, we need to break that logjam to open us into a new era of our lives as Americans. And if we don't, the longer we don't do that, the more problematic it's going to get. I feel that very, very strongly, and I've written about that too, because I write about everything.
Because then it becomes that woman has to be, like, Hillary was inarguably the most qualified person to ever run for president. How qualified must the first woman president be? Well, if we wait another 20 years?
Well, yeah, exactly. It almost becomes, it's almost like, what's that thing where it becomes I can't think of the phrase, but it's like it starts to create its own toxicity around the idea of making that event so hard to reach that it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and then we'll get there and it'll be like, oh, so we have a female president. It won't seem so astronomical, just like after, Obama's first term, having a black president didn't seem so astronomical, despite the fact that it brought all the racists in the world out.
Yeah, because now it feels like it would be even harder to elect a black president.
I think so too, but I think that's because Trump, and again, looking at this from an evolutionary standpoint, I don't know. And I think that he has given franchise to all the worst of America, the bigots, the haters, the sexists, the xenophobes. He has given permission for all of them to feel like they've been invited to the big dance. And right now, they're on the big stage. And so I don't think that's insurmountable. I have a feeling...
It's also not the majority.
No, and I have a feeling when Trump's gone, which I hope is sooner as opposed to later, there will be still some ugly people around, but I think they're almost like their juice comes from him, right? And so when he's no longer in that position, it's like they'll be unplugged. That's what I think. They'll shift back into their less aggressive mode because they won't have any power. They won't have their cult leader in the White House. And hopefully he will be the last one of that ilk. I hope to God this isn't a harbinger of dreadful things to come. I don't think so, because they are a minority. And I think even people that voted for him, a lot of them are like going, I don't know. That didn't turn out to be so good. Yeah, so we'll see.
Well, let's hope.
Yeah.
In any event, we are blessed to live at interesting times.
We are very much so. Very, very much so.
What advice do you have for women coming up, say, who want to be writers?
I guess my biggest advice would be to get really, really good at what you do. I think, and this is not a secret because I've talked about this before, is that I think the self-publishing, the advent of the self-publishing movement was really wonderful and really opened a lot of doors to people. But it also changed the standards by which we present and promote our work. And a lot of work that was not very good, and a lot of work still that is not very good, is flooding the marketplace because people went, oh, wow, anybody can write and anybody can publish. And that's true. They now can. Anybody could. My cat could. So what happens is that you feel this tremendous flush of power that, I can sit down and write my memoirs. And I know people who've done this, and they can't afford an editor, and they can't afford a formatter, and they can't really afford an artist to design the book. So they're like, well, that's okay. I'm putting it out the way it is, as is. And the marketplace gets flooded with work that's very poorly put together, poorly edited, poorly designed, poorly written. And it starts to create this... When I first self-published, I was really shocked at the stigmas that were attached to it. Reviewers that would have no interest in your book if you were self-published.
Oh, people wouldn't even look at it?
Yeah, no. Media, no bookstores, forget about it. It didn't matter how good your book was. They wouldn't even look at it. You were self-published. And a lot of people were upset about that, but it was like, well, we've kind of created our own mess here because too many of us have not done a good enough job. So,
does it mean a publisher wouldn't look at you?
Well, my first book, like I did with this book, I tried to get an agent, and I could not get an agent. And if you can't get an agent, you can't get a publishing deal.
Right.
Unless you do what I did with She Writes Press. And She Writes Press, I don't believe existed at that time. I don't know. And so I self-published it. But because I'm a professional, I had top editors, top designers, top formatters, top copy editors, top everything, put the book together, and it's a beautiful book. And it's been very well received. It's won awards. It's been well reviewed. And I know many other self-publishers who are that demanding of their own work. So that would be my advice. Be that demanding of your own work.
Act like a publisher.
Act like a publisher. Don't act like, little Annie Glitz who's down in the basement going, I'm going to write and publish my... No. If you want to play in this game, help the industry. Help the industry by contributing the best possible work you can so that it raises the level of the work that's out there, so that people stop viewing self-published work as dreck, just because a lot of it is. Because I know some incredible writers. I mean, books that should be winning, Pulitzers, that are self-published because they can't get agents. And they're brilliant writers, brilliant books, beautifully put together, but they are self-published. And
then they get lost.
They get lost. And that's really tragic, But that's the industry. So if you want to be a writer, learn the craft. Really, really learn the craft, right? Don't just presume. I mean, you see jokes about it all the time. People just decide, hey, I'm going to be a violin player, and it's like, and it's like, no, there's a craft to this. People study years to learn how to do this well. Yeah, and to do it well. And so I would say do that, and then avail yourself of every professional person you can. Know that you can't do it cheaply. You have to do it. It's like you don't open a restaurant by putting a box out on the street and putting a tarp over it and grabbing some sandwiches, right? There's costs of doing business. You got to pay to have your restaurant look beautiful, get a great chef, create wonderful menus. Well, it's the same with your book. You got to pay to set up your business in a way that speaks highly of you and communicates your creative ideas beautifully, so that people are attracted to your work. And as a member of an industry that is struggling in these days, you will be contributing something worthy and valuable. So I think that's really the main issue, is be a professional. Be a professional.
I love that. We're going to tweet that too.
Yeah.
Is there anything you haven't said already that you want white people to know?
I want white people to know?
That you want white people to know regarding race.
Regarding race. Well, I think I said it earlier, that I think far too many white people do not have much interaction with people outside their own demographic. We live in a city, and people that live in cities have that kind of interaction quite a bit. But in the greater part of the United States, that's not necessarily true. And even in cities where there are different ethnicities, they're often ghettoized in separate neighborhoods and stuff. And I think that empathy is the antidote to everything. And I have said that often. It is. Because if you can empathize with somebody, then their travails and their obstacles and their hurts are things that you feel and you have concern for. And if you don't have empathy, then you're not going to care. You're not going to care about the fact that, another beloved rapper got shot in front of his store the other day, shot and killed. You're not going to care about how white privilege informs your life so very, very differently. I guess actually that right there is what I'd want people to get, is that when you've been raised white, and you are white, and you're raised white, and you're raised by a white family and in a white household. And
that sounds so funny, because I bet most people don't consider themselves as being raised white.
Right.
Because what does that look like?
Well, because that's considered the norm, right? You go to schools.
That is privilege.
Right. Well, that's my point, is that you go to schools, it's all, you think, well, that's just the way life, that's the norm.
All the history books are white?
But if you go into a black neighborhood, you'd see that's not their norm.
Right.
That's not their norm. You're not their norm. And they're not your norm. So there's some problem here if we're not communicating outside of our, quote, norms. And that's what white privilege is. It's the idea that, and this woman said, well, it's not my fault. I can't help it. Well, no, it's not. It's not your fault. But it's like if you're benefiting from it and you aren't as outraged by the unfairness and inequity of life for people of color.
It's the assumption of the superiority.
Right. Then you are part of the problem. If you can look at what's going on in the world and not be outraged by it and not say, I have to do something to make this better, however you do that, then you are part of the problem. And so that's what I'd want to say to white people. I mean, I think white people get very comfortable in their lives that are so white and so protected and buffered by that. They don't even realize it because they don't. I had a guy I know, white guy, wealthy, young father, his wife, very nice, wonderful people. And something came up about politics, and I had referenced Trump in my usual negative way. And then I said, I'm sorry, I don't even know what your politics are, so that was really not unfair. And he goes, oh, no, don't worry about it. I don't do politics. I don't do that stuff.
I don't do politics?
Yeah. And it made me angry because I thought, oh, okay, because you're privileged. You have wealth. You have
it's not going to affect
great
that guy,
job.
no
So it
matter
doesn't
what
affect
happens.
me. I don't think about that because it doesn't affect me. And it was like when, people were telling people to vote for Jill Stein last election, or don't worry about it because even if Trump gets in, it's like, well, but it won't affect you, Susan Sarandon. It won't affect you because you're a wealthy white woman who's going to...
in Susan's defense, she did say it would hasten the revolution.
Well,
she was not wrong.
Well, no, except she is wrong because the revolution hasn't happened. We're in the throes of the agony of the explosion. Yeah. We haven't had the revolution. The revolution is we're still struggling with how to do that, and I think, but along the way, a lot of people have fallen, and that's the thing. Yeah. It didn't need to be that way, and that's...
We didn't need to do it the hard way.
No, and that's white privilege is saying, it won't affect me, so it's okay if that happens because I won't be hurt by it. I'm covered. I got my money, I got my privilege, I got my career. It doesn't matter that all of you people are going to suffer because I'm not even thinking about you. And that's the thing. So to me, that's the message, empathy. And I don't know, I don't know how to inspire that any more than I can by writing about it or talking about it. But it's almost like people have to experience some measure of it, which is what this book is about, to come full circle, is that this character, this white female character, got to experience some measure of it, and it shocked her and hurt her, and it changed her world because she just hadn't really thought it out, hadn't thought about it much because she was so protected from all of that she didn't have to think about it. But he did every day of his life, every minute of his life he did, as every black man or woman does, and...
It's like the tiny thing, like for women, when you ask them, what do you do every day to protect yourself from rape? Women have a list of 1,000 things that they do. You unlock your car right when you get to it, you carry your keys in your hand, you don't walk down an alley, you do all these things to adjust your behavior to prevent rape.
Sure.
And then if you ask people of color, what do you do, what calculations do you make all day, every day as you go about your daily life? You really pointed that out in the book, and I think a lot of white people are not even aware of that kind of thing.
They're not.
The way that men are not aware of what women do to protect themselves.
That's exactly right. That's a perfect equation. That's exactly right. And it's like this argument that's happening with Joe Biden, where a lot of people are denigrating this woman for saying that it made her uncomfortable that he came up behind her and he touched her body and he nuzzled her neck and her hair. And men are like, oh, big deal. I hug people. And it's like, you don't know as a woman what that feels. I've had men do that to me too, and it's very weird. Mm-hmm. It's very weird to have a man, particularly a man who's your boss, come up behind you and put his arms around you and start nuzzling your neck. That's, as a woman, I go, do you just not get this? And the thing is, men don't get it because they don't have that experience, most of them,
Right, and your brain is, while that's happening, doing a whole calculation. Can I say no? Is this going to escalate?
Exactly.
What does this mean?
Is it going to affect my job? Blah, 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 blah.
You're not thinking, oh, how nice.
No. And if you are, a lot of women are like, well, I love it. Well, great, then great. You are okay with it. But she wasn't, and I wasn't when someone did that to me. Don't touch me. You're not someone who can touch me.
Don't put your nose in my ear.
No. If I want that, I will let you know. But do not, and I think that's men not understanding that is exactly as you said, very similar to white people not getting what it's like to, for a black man to walk into a store and have the security guard suddenly just shift his position a little bit, or when the guy that I was living with would cross the street and people would suddenly, lock their doors as he got near their car, and I'd notice that and I'd be like, what the hell?
Or to walk by a white woman on the street and have her react and clutch her purse.
Right.
What does that feel like?
Right, exactly. And and of course, as we said earlier, in the news where you see these mostly white women, I think it's all white women, calling the police over the most benign things that are happening. And so it's like you can't even predict what's going to set off some lunatic racist who's going to get the police involved, and those acts can end up being fatal for a black person, right? Yeah. If you say or do the wrong thing, you got to do this whole thing, yes sir, no sir, how humiliating, how
it's exhausting and enraging.
Awful. It is very exhausting and enraging, and having witnessed it myself, it was exhausting and enraging to me, and I kept thinking, and I'm the white girlfriend. I'm not even the guy.
Yeah.
I'm not even the focus of their harassment and their bigotry and their bias and their violence and their aggression. And, I just think white people need to explore empathy, racial empathy, in ways that they are not. Just saying I'm open-minded and I loved Obama and I have black friends, none of that matters. What matters is becoming actively empathetic and however that translates for you, whatever that means, whatever you can do to change the narrative. It was like in the book where she realizes, she looks around the room and she realizes she has not hired one person of color in her entire staff.
Yeah.
It's something as simple as that where it's like, why has that not happened? Well, she hadn't even thought of it.
Didn't occur to anybody.
Didn't occur to her. And all of a sudden she's thinking, but that's exactly what his sister was talking about. Well, you don't think about that stuff. Well, those are the kind of things you think about. It's like...
I think that it really is on white people, especially, to take a minute and examine your own bias.
Yeah.
And to take that extra step of doing that work, of noticing, oh, I haven't hired any people of color. Or noticing, oh, why am I having that reaction? I'm having a reaction right now. Why am I having that?
Sure.
And that's a lot of work. And it takes a lot of consciousness and a lot of thought and a lot of pausing.
Yeah.
And I think we have to do it.
I think so too. Well, and you have to be willing to look at your own and say, I didn't realize I had this bias, or
because we all have it.
Of course.
Let's just accept that as a baseline.
Well, I remember I got on a plane. I think it might have been a plane flying to Europe, and the man sitting next to me was clearly of Middle Eastern descent. He was wearing a robe. He looked the part. And I had a moment, because this was after something had blown up. I don't know. And I had a moment where I was like, oh, wow. And then I had to look at, why are you doing that? And exactly what you just said, which is you have to be willing to self-examine. You have to be willing to go, why am I having this stupid reaction just because he's dressed in his ethnicity? Well, what's that all about? That's stupid. And then kind of figuring out, well, some of it's the fear because this plane just blew up a few months ago, and that's scary, and it was a Middle East, and you go, yeah, that's all true, but that's like saying, but then, and to me, the perfect way to counteract that bias is to go, how many white men have committed murder? How many white men have raped? How many white men have mass murdered with guns?
Yeah.
And are we fearful of, do we walk around being afraid of a white man sits next to us? No.
Right. Excellent point.
Right. It's like...
We're allowed to have nuance about white men.
Right. And yet, that's why when people get into this whole thing about the border and they're all like, well, crime, and like the most, or even terrorists, the most deaths that have occurred in the last several years have been white men with guns.
Mm-hmm. The skill of perspective.
Right. So it's like, let's get real.
They're not even in the equation.
No. And yet we don't walk around just being, endemically afraid of white men. We're more afraid of a black man than we are of a white man. And yet a white man is, that demographic has wreaked more havoc on the lives of Americans than the black man. So it's very, you got to pull it apart. And if you don't pull it apart, then you're just going to be a victim to stereotype and bigotry and propaganda, and that's, we're seeing the effects of that right now, and it's not good. It's not good.
At the end of the day, we're all just people. Can we just be people?
We're all made of the same stuff.
Let's get there.
It's really true. It's absolutely true.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's a good conversation. It's an important conversation. Thank you for reading the book, and I'm really glad you enjoyed it.
How can people find you?
LorraineDevonWilke.com.
Okay, and the book is called The Alchemy of Noise. Go get it. It's out. Go get it.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Lorraine Devon Wilke for sharing her story. And special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on your favorite podcast provider and leave a review. And of course, on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out in letters, for added features, bios of our guests, and the merch. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms. And go subscribe to catchabreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.